If you're happy with what you're doing, if you are so fortunate to truly love what you're doing in life, then that's the highest measure of success that you could ever achieve.
That's Brent Maher, producer, songwriter, and engineer whose career spans decades of landmark records. For him, success has never been about credits or awards, but about building a life in music that stays meaningful long after the studio lights go off.
When I started, I just wanted to be a recording engineer. That was my dream. But things change, and you grow from one thing to the next.
His career reflects that evolution. By staying open to growth, Brent moved naturally from engineering to producing to songwriting. He let curiosity and craft guide each step rather than chasing a fixed title.
I always felt that we were making really wonderful music together, but nobody really knows. Oh man,
Today, Brent shares how a career built on curiosity, patience, and love for the craft can outlast trends, technology, and industry shifts. By the end of this conversation, you'll learn why staying focused on the work itself is often what leads to the most enduring success in music. Stick around. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and this is the Inner Circle Podcast. You've had such success, and more success than I think anyone I've ever met, in various areas of the music business. As a producer, as a songwriter, as an engineer, what do you consider yourself when you say to somebody, you're a producer, you're a songwriter? What do you first think of?
Oh my gosh. I guess I would say producer, songwriter, engineer. And of course, when I first started, you could flip all of that, because when I started, I just wanted to be a recording engineer. And that was it. That was my dream. But things change, and you grow from one thing to the next. So I grew from being an engineer to seeing this guy sitting next to me and saying, I think I kind of liked a little bit of that job too, right? And then so once I morphed into that job, still engineering, of course, it sort of brought me back to playing again, and then eventually writing songs,
So you'd stop playing when you were engineering?
Completely. I could even tell you the last gig I did. But yeah, I had probably not touched my guitar for, I'd say, 4 or 5 years.
Did you miss it, just out of curiosity?
Well, did I miss it during that time?
Yeah.
No. I was so engrossed in engineering and just beginning my production career, I never assumed I ever need to touch it again, right? And then I was working with Ike and Tina Turner during the Proud Mary days, and I came home one night and was still kind of like wired up. I couldn't really go to sleep, so I got out of bed and I had my little have a Gretsch dual jet, and pulled it out from under the bed, and it makes just enough noise, because it's a semi-hollow body guitar.
Yeah.
And I
have one back here, by the way, so.
You have one, you say?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
cool. Well, anyway, I took that little baby out and I started playing it, and, all of a sudden I wound up writing a song that evening, and my wife finally went to bed, and when we got up the next day, my wife Janelle says, "What were you doing last night?" And I said, "Well, I was writing a song, actually." She said, "You wrote a song?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, play it for me." And so I did. Oddly enough, she said, "Well, you need to do a demo on that." And I said, "Well, But I finally did. And literally about 2 days later, I was listening to it around 11 o'clock in the morning. Ike and Tina were coming in to the studio about 2 o'clock or so. Well, they came in early, and I was listening to this song I wrote, and it put down with me playing guitar and singing and everything, sometimes you get that funny feeling that somebody's behind you, and you don't know who it is or how they came in. Well, that was what was going on. I felt like, I turned around and said, "Oh, God, it was Ike." And I started to hit stop. He said, No. Let me hear the rest of this tune." I went, "Oh, Lord." So anyway, he listened to the rest of it, and then Tina comes in, and he said, "Baby, listen to this." And he said, "Oh." So I played it, from the beginning, and the next day they came in to work again and said, "Tina can't get that song out of her head. She wants to cut it." And she said, and Ike said, "I want you to produce it." I used a rhythm section that I was using at that time, and we recorded it, and that kind of got the ball rolling as far as me having interest in songwriting. So it all goes back to that little period of time,
Yeah. Speaking of having someone behind you, I had the same experience. I was mixing at Cherokee Studios here in Los Angeles, and I felt somebody behind me. I felt the door open in the control room and someone behind me. And when I finished, I turned around and it was Ringo. And I couldn't even say anything to him. He walked out and he gave me one of these. And I thought, okay, I guess it's cool.
Good. That's awesome.
Speaking as a songwriter, when you produce something that you wrote, have you done a demo, first of all? And if you did, are you trying, when you're cutting the song finally, are you trying to get it as close to the demo as possible? Or what you hear in your head? How does that work for you?
For me, I've never done a lot of demos on songs that I've written, other than just like a guitar vocal. Or if I've co-written it with, let's say, a keyboard player, then we would just do like a piano vocal demo of it, I've always believed that that shows the song the best, and then let the producer or the artist imagine what the canvas is behind them. And a lot of my writing, more in the last maybe 10 years or so, I've written sort of for just the pleasure of it, right? But before then, I was pretty much a project writer. Like when I was producing the Judds, I would have an idea for a song or a groove or just a musical concept of some sort. And if I wanted to co-write it, like with Don Slitz or Mike Reed or somebody, I'd call them up and say, hey, I got an idea I want to run by you. And we'd go by and sit down, and if it developed into something, then I would play it for Y and Naomi, and if it pushed any buttons whatsoever, if we did a demo, then we would do it with them singing it, And a lot of the artists I've worked with over the years, that's sort of how that takes shape, So it's not like I'm trying to chase a demo that I've already done.
Yeah. Boy, things are different today where you have to do a full-blown demo, or you're expected to do a full-blown production demo.
Yeah.
And then chase that later. And that's a hard thing. Speaking of the Judds, how did you discover them?
Well, that was a very stressful chain of events, actually. Diana, my daughter, driving home from high school, got into a car wreck, a really bad car wreck, a head-on. And she was taken to the Williamson County Hospital in Franklin, Tennessee, which is right outside of Nashville. I was in the studio working, and I got a call. It said, my wife was on the phone. She said, Diana's been in a car wreck. You need to get to the hospital. So I went to the hospital, and it was quite severe. She was in the hospital for about 3 weeks. Naomi Judd was a registered nurse at that time, and she was assigned to the floor where Diana was, her room was, and she wound up taking care of her most of the time. And Diana loved her. She said, nobody gives shots like Naomi Judd. So anyway, she was really sweet. And of course, I knew who she was because she'd been on this Ralph Emery show here in town. It was a morning show. She and Winona would do their songs like, maybe once a month they'd make an appearance on that show. So my wife always loved them. Janelle, she said, Brent, come down here, these girls. And I said, I'm still in bed. Get out of bed and come down here. So anyway, when Diana got out of the hospital, Naomi came up to me and she said, my daughter and I sing. And I said, yeah, I know that. I've seen you guys on television. Quite good. And she said, well, Y's getting out of high school in a few months. And can I give you like a little cassette tape and that we've done in our kitchen, and could you listen to it and just give us some thoughts, what you might think? And I said, sure. So anyway, it took me a bit to get to it, which I got a lot of grief from Janelle one day. And so I listened to it and absolutely loved what I heard. Just those two, on a portable cassette deck, and I really felt there was something there. And so I called her up and said, let's just get together and talk about music. So that's how the whole thing started. I would go over to their house, which was only about, a 10-minute drive from their little house to where our place was. And I'd go over there, about once or twice a week when I get off work and just sit around and play guitar, and they'd play me songs and they'd play me music that inspired them. And it was all over the map. I mean, all over the map. So we did that for about maybe 6 to 8, 9 months, something like that. And we wound up with 3 songs that were quite different, but there was something that would weave them all together. And one was Had a Dream, which wound up being our first single. And then another one was Mama, He's Crazy, which turned out to be a classic record. And then the other one was John Deere Tractor. And they were all 3 quite different, but it all worked. And so that gave me the idea, well, here's the goalpost. Had a Dream was sort of on the hip bluesy side. And then John Deere Tractor is a gorgeous bluegrass song. and Mommy He's Crazy is a right down the middle of country song. Now, that's the playing field. And so that's sort of how we got our feet in the water. And we went into the studio and did a demo, but just with them, just with Wyatt playing guitar. And I may have played on one song, I'm not too sure. And then those two singing. And then that wound up getting the interest of Joe Galante. And then that wound up, with a meeting in Joe's office with Dick Whitehouse, who actually was interested in him too. And so we sat there, we played for Joe and Nerl Wilson and 3 or 4 other people, head of promotion, Jack Weston. I can't remember. I remember these guys' names. But anyway, we sat down, we played the 3 songs, and then, and I could tell that Joe just adored him. I mean, he got those girls, man, from the first second I started singing. And so when it was all over, he and I talked for a few minutes. He said, "So what do you think these records might be, Brent?" And I said, "Well, not a whole lot different than what you're hearing right now. We're going to really base it around acoustic instruments. We'll have bass and drums and probably some steel, but we're going to make it drive and be competitive. But it's not going to be a big wall of electric guitars. It's going to be right down to some really be, really hone in on that sound and really build it around those 2 girls and their voices." And he said, "Go for it, go. We'll make it record."
I asked you that for a reason, because when the Judds first hit, I kind of didn't get it. And then I was at Meet 'em in Cannes. They have the big showcase at the end, and the Judds were part of the showcase. And they came on, they did 4 or 5 songs, and I got it immediately. They started, and it's like, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. They were just so good.
Yeah.
That it's like, oh, I get this. I understand completely.
Yeah.
And it was just the 2 of them, and I think it was just bass and drums. It was very, as you say, it was very stripped down, very acoustic, but boy, did it work.
Yeah, yeah.
So I remember that distinctly, and I just wondered if you had a similar experience.
Well, I sort of bought into it as soon as I heard them sing together. I just felt there was something just magic between those 2,
Yeah.
Now, I never dreamed, I've been asked a number of times, "Well, did you know you guys were going to wind up selling millions of records and, have the impact you had, or people say that you had on country music and all that stuff?" And the answer to that is always no. I always felt that we were making really wonderful music together. I always felt that from day one. But nobody really knows, oh, man, I'm going to chalk up another award here, or I'm going to, people are going to fall out over a bunch of #1 records. I don't think anybody ever feels that. And when it does happen, it sort of takes you by surprise, and it's about as good as a surprise as you can get in the business,
Yeah, I'd say, definitely.
Hey, quick pause. Have you ever felt like your mixes are close, but just not quite to the level that you hear from the pros? The truth is, even with today's powerful home studios, it's the techniques that make all the difference. The Mixing Engineer's Handbook, now in its 6th edition, walks you through these techniques step by step, from EQ and compression to immersive audio and the latest plugins. You'll also hear directly from some of the world's top mixers through exclusive interviews and bonus content. If you want your mixes to sound polished and professional no matter what setup you're working on, scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the show notes. Now, back to the conversation.
You've worked with so many legends. Chuck Berry, Elvis, Glenn Campbell, Dolly Parton. I mean, you can go on and on. What a list. Was there one project with one of those legends that kind of sticks out in your mind as something extraordinary?
From a personal standpoint, I engineered Duke Ellington's, maybe his 2nd or 3rd last record before he passed away. It was just Duke and Ray Brown. My mother and dad played his music just constantly in the house. And not only Duke, but that big band era, that type of music, And so I was so familiar, with his music and Count Basie and all those type of big bands back then. So for me to be in the console and that Norman Granz was sitting right. He was the producer of the project, of course, founded Pablo Records, right?
Yeah.
And was so responsible for bringing a lot of that jazz into the mainstream back into the day, right? I have to tell you, it was like, I'd almost want to pinch myself, like, is Duke and Ray really out there? Is this some dream I'm having? Am I here actually recording Duke Ellington, you know? And a few times, Bobby, I took him back to the hotel, and I had this bright canary yellow Mazda. They had just come out, the little RX-7s, you know? I was so proud of that car. And one day, Duke was waiting on a cab to pick him up, you know, and Norman and I guess Ray had already left the studio, and Duke, I guess, was probably on the phone or something. Anyway, he asked the receptionist out front, could you call me a cab? And I said, well, Mr. Ellington, I can run you back to the hotel. This is that United recording in Las Vegas, by the way.
Yeah, yeah.
And so he said, well, that would be nice, Brent. That would be nice. Sure, yeah, that'd be great. And so I said, I'm going to get Duke in my new car.
Yeah.
So anyway, I walked out there. He looked at that little car. He said, my, it's bright, isn't it? Yes, sir. He got in the front seat, and he said, I told him that my parents adored his music, and I'd been listening to it since a child, And, well, where were you from, Brent? I said, we were raised in Kansas, little town, Chase, Kansas, right in the middle of the state, about 800 people, And, but I said, my mom and dad, boy, it was your era of music that really filled the household. And it was just a great experience. Just a great experience.
Yeah, when you meet your influences, it's really something different. It's hard to explain many times. I know I've gone through the same thing where I've met somebody that it's like, wow, am I really here?
Yeah.
Tell me about working with Elvis. Speaking of legends.
Well, I will cut this story really short. They had booked a studio. This is back in Nashville now, at Creative Recording. And they booked like a whole week and to cut Elvis. And Felton Jarvis was the producer. And they had flown in from L.A., his band, which was Ronnie Tudd on drums, and Jerry Sheff, and Glenn D., and James Burton. Plus there was a couple of guys from Nashville that were going to sit in with those guys. The Stamps, the singers were there. I mean, it was a plethora of people filling that studio. The day that we were supposed to start recording, I had, sound the band. They had about 5 songs that they had actually rehearsed in the jungle room at Graceland. Elvis sort of told Felton, like, well, this is the first one I want to do. And so anyway, we get that information, Elvis called Felton, I guess. So we run that down, and everybody loves the sounds. They love the drum sound. They like this. Everybody loves everything. And so Felton goes back to the hotel, to get Elvis, and he's gone for like about well over an hour. And finally comes back, he says, all right, he's right behind me, he'll be here in about 10 minutes. Well, let's just say that's about 4 in the afternoon, let's just say that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And about 5, no Elvis, about 6, no Elvis, 2 in the morning, no Elvis. Finally, Felton says, well, he ain't coming, so let's go home. Be back tomorrow here at 2 o'clock. Everybody goes home. This goes on for 3 days of showing up at 2 in the afternoon and staying there till 2 in the night, at nighttime. And Felton going back and forth to the hotel, coming back saying, I swear you guys, he's going to be here in 5 minutes. Well, the last time he said, I am not kidding. He's in the car. He just missed the stoplight on Thompson Lane. Otherwise, he'd be here. We all look at Felton. Well, what he did at the stoplight, he turned right and went to the airport and flew home to Memphis. And so Felton is freaking out. He sends everybody home, and he said, Brent, can we work tomorrow? And I said, on what? And he said, well, all those rehearsal tapes that they did on these tunes, the remote truck from RCA was outside Graceland, and they record everything. And maybe we could do something with that. He said, I got 5 or 6 rolls of 2-inch tape. And I'm like, well, you got the whole week. Yeah. When do you want to start? So we started at a decent time because it was really late in the morning. And so we went through all of those 2-inch tapes. And there was 2 songs, Pledge You My Love, and then also Way Down, that he had done probably 3 or 4 times at least. But hardly any of them were good from beginning to end. And a lot of them didn't even make all the way. He would just start in the middle of a song and start talking to Ronnie or somebody. The jungle room isn't that big of a room, and the whole band was set up, and Elvis just had a 57 hand mic just walking around the room. So at any given time, he might be like 4 feet from the drum kit, and Ronnie's sitting there playing. So anyway, I wound up splicing together a complete vocal from, I don't know how many takes, 3 or 4 or 5, 6 tapes. You look at the 2-inch tape, and it was just a blur splicing tape. And so we pieced together just a vocal. And then we went and started replacing, not replacing, but putting the band on it. And I remember we did bass and drums first. And then we did, I think, piano and guitars. Anyway, we built it out, right?
You built it out with live players. They came in and
Yeah, we had those guys come in and basically played what they did as they were rehearsing, right? And while we were doing it, I didn't have Elvis's voice way up front. I kind of had it just kind of tucked in there a little bit. It sounded great. The problem was when I started mixing the thing, and you want Elvis's voice where you want it, every time he'd quit singing, you'd hear the other band.
Yeah.
All the leakage into his microphone. And Bobby, this is pre-automation. So you know where I'm heading with that. So if you looked at the 2-track that I was mixing, I would only be able to do like maybe, 3 or 4 lines. And then I'd have to just stop. And because I'd be chasing the fader down, and sometimes I would make it, but then when I bring it back up, it wouldn't be, where you want it.
Yeah.
You know what? There's no way that I can get from beginning to end. No way that's going to work. So I'm just going to just mix it, a half a verse or a quarter of a verse at a time. And so anyway, I did that, and Felton wasn't there. He said, I can't listen to this.
Smart man, yeah.
Yeah. And so anyway, he comes back in, like a day later and listens to it. He said, Brent, this is wonderful. It sounds bloody great. And I said, are you kidding me? Anyway, I never actually met Elvis.
Huh.
I never met him. It never came into the studio. My mentor, the guy that gave me my first job was Bill Porter, who was a famous engineer here in Nashville.
Yeah.
And engineered almost all of Elvis's records up to that time that were cut in Nashville. Bill did. So I kept thinking of all of these great sounding records that Bill did. And then I was his protege. And this is it.
Yeah.
But years later, I never did really like it. And I could never get in my car without hearing it. It was just playing it was number one like that. So anyway, probably 30 years later, if not more, I heard it in a store in Estes Park, Colorado, where we were vacationing. And they had like a compilation of Elvis's number ones and things like that. And I'm hearing Money, Honey, and all these great songs. And all of a sudden I hear this song, and I'm going, wow, that's good. Yeah, that's good. I went, wait a minute, that's the one I did. It actually sounds pretty good. And so anyway, that's sort of the Elvis story. It was last number one, but I never actually got to meet him. And I wish it would have worked out that I could have,
Yeah. Well, sounds like that wasn't up to you.
It wasn't up to me. I was there. I was ready.
Yeah, right. Tell me about your new project that you're working on. I think you're working on a lot of projects at the same time from what I can tell, but the musical novel, Night of the Orphan Train. How did that come about? What is that?
Well, what it is, it's a musical novel. It's a fictional novel that's based on historical facts, and it's dated back around 1911 is when the story starts. In its current form, it's an audiobook, but it's a musical. If you would, which I don't think you can, but if you would buy, let's say, Les Mis as an audiobook, and it was narrated like an audiobook, that's sort of what it is. You would hear the story, and then the songs would appear exactly as they would appear in the play, or the film, whatever you watch Les Mis at. Well, this is a similar type thing, and how I got the idea is really I saw a road sign on Interstate 70, right in the middle of Kansas, and there was this huge road sign, and it said, visit the Orphan Train Museum, Concordia, Kansas. And this little wafy child all bundled up, and very period looking. And I went, what is that? Well, we didn't exit. We kept going. And, but Janelle, my wife, went right to her computer and popped up, the Orphan Train Museum, Concordia, Kansas, pops right up. It's a Smithsonian, a museum. And for the next day and a half, we just went from one website to another, finding out about a 50-year period of our country's history that hardly anybody knows about. And what we found out is from the late 1850s up until like 1920, early 20s, in New York City, there were literally thousands of homeless orphan street kids basically cluttering the streets. They called it an epidemic. And it kept recycling because of all the influenzas that would be going through the city. And of course, during those times, there was no idea about why people were keeling over and dying, right? And it was the Spanish flu, and then some variations of that, economic downturns, and then eventually World War I. All those things combined was like a perfect storm where thousands of kids were just left with nothing. And there was this Methodist minister, William Loring Brace, that finally came up with this idea after praying for God knows how many years about something has to be done. I can't keep going to work every day and seeing what I'm seeing, right? He came up with this idea of, well, all of these immigrants that are coming into our country now, a lot of them aren't satisfied with just staying in the city or going north or south. They want to go west because they're giving land away. In some cases, they are paying people to homestead land, right? And so Brace's idea, well, look, some of these families might need an extra kid. Maybe they need some extra kids to work in the field. Maybe the mom had 3 boys and wants a little girl, whatever the situation, right? And he said, well, let's just say that we scooped up a bunch of kids. We put them in like a boxcar to begin with. And I'm going to call a Methodist church in Toledo or somewhere, Topeka, Kansas, and say there's going to be a boxcar with adoptable children at your train station in a week. Put the word out. We're going to send you pamphlets to put them in barbershops, grocery stores, wherever you want to put them, and it'll say, adopt me with this little kid, right? Show up to the church and get vetted, so to speak. And that was real hit and miss, as you can imagine.
Yeah, sure.
And people showed up, and they would check these kids out and sort of inspect them like cattle, really. It's kind of sad. They'd look at their teeth, they'd look at their eyes, they'd look at their hair, they'd feel for muscles. And some kids would get chosen, and they would be in beautiful homes, loving people. And then other kids, it wasn't much different than being enslaved. You know, who knows what the mix was. Anyway, during this period of time, once they got that idea developed, Reverend Brace formed this Children's Aid Society with a group of successful businessmen and women. And they organized it and started utilizing the whole train system, which was pretty much developed then. They took, in that period of time, 250,000 kids off the streets of just New York City and delivered them to every single state in the Union. 250,000.
Wow.
And who knows about this? Hardly anyone.
Yeah, right. I've never heard about it until now.
I know so many people from New York, and they've never heard of it. So anyway, that had such an effect on me. And by the time, you know, we rolled through St. Louis and we're heading south, you know, towards Nashville, I started a song. And in that song, 3 little kids were given birth, Caroline, Billy, and Jacob. And they're all about 11 years old. And in this song, they meet on the streets of New York, and they form this little nucleus of a family, which is all they want in life, you know. And so you meet these little street kids at 11 years old, and at the end of Act 1, they're 14, and a lot of things have taken place. And then there's a time jump when Act 2 starts, and they're 18. Then you follow them till they're about 22. And of course, World War I winds up in that second part of the play. That's what it is, and I wrote that one song, and Bobby, I thought that was it. I figured, well, I wrote this song. It's called Orphan Train. Trey Hensley and Rob Ickes recorded it, and then Tammy Rogers came in and sang some harmony and played some fiddle on it, and I started playing it for people, and I kept getting the same information, so what's the rest of the story? And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, you just can't stop here. This is the start of something. I said, it's the start of a song, and the song is done. You know, I said, Brent, you're missing the boat. This is the start of something. This is like a musical. This is a movie. This is something other than just, you know, a 4-minute song. After about hearing that about a half a dozen times, I got thinking, well, you know what? Where would I start? Without going into too much detail, that one song actually gave birth to the 3 little kids. And then that song gave birth to about 19 other songs that tell the story, along with all the dialogue, about these 3 kids' lives that take place between 1911 and it pretty much wraps up in 1920, yeah. So that's it. It's a audiobook, as I said earlier on. You know, it's on Amazon, and it's on Audible and, you know, Barnes & Noble. And it's out there, and and it's getting accepted really well. It's something I never dreamed of doing. Never dreamed in a million years that I would take that on. But I really, really, really love it. It's kind of like a platform someday to be turned into maybe a film, or, a theater piece, So that's all out there. It might happen. We've talked to some people who've approached me on it. And so we'll see. But right now, it's a living, breathing audiobook to be enjoyed.
I love the concept of an audiobook, a musical novel. And I keep on thinking, why hasn't anyone thought of this before?
Well, I can tell you one reason. If you're going to produce it like a musical and you're writing a fictional novel, and you turn it into a musical, there's a bit of expense with all that.
Yeah.
Not just like an author writing a book with your time.
Yeah.
Your computer or pad and a pencil or whatever. I got thinking about this, Bobby. I said, I wonder why nobody else has done that. I said, well, one thing, it costs a lot of money.
Yeah. Makes sense. Sure.
But we have a wonderful publishing company that's working with us called One Publishing. And they've been in the business and are highly respected for years and years, and they've never seen anything like this. There have been some artists, very, very famous artists, that have, told their life story, and then embedded in that will be some of their hit songs and things like that. So, and that makes sense, But as far as the completely fictional story, based on historical facts, so to speak, I don't know if it's the only one or maybe there's some others out there. I don't know.
Last question, Brent. What's the best piece of advice that maybe somebody imparted to you or maybe you learned along the way?
Really good question. I don't know if somebody has given me, this is a to live by piece of information. Somebody asked me the other day about what does success mean to you? And I thought about that for a second. I said, well, you know what? If you're happy at what you're doing, if you are so fortunate to truly love what you're doing in life, then that's the highest measure of success that you could ever achieve, on that level, not talking about family and things like that, right? I've had people, I think Bill Porter and I had a bit of a discussion about that so many years ago, and he could just tell that early on that I truly loved being around these great world-class musicians and working in this studio environment where things are becoming bigger than life. And he said, Brent, I have never stopped being in love with what I do. And he said, just keep that in mind. Now that you bring it up, that conversation comes back to me. I hadn't really thought about that much, Bobby. But I remember that conversation with Bill. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a good one for sure. Usually I'd stop right here, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about your Gretsch guitar collection.
Oh, my gosh. Well, I do have a very nice collection. My first Gretsch is a 1958 dual jet, and I got that when I was 17, I think. I never really intended at any time in my life to have a collection of guitars, but about 20 years ago, a friend of mine called me up and said, what are you doing? It was on a Saturday, and I said, well, I'm not doing anything, really. He said, well, I'm going to come by pick you up. We'll go to a vintage guitar show.
Ah, yeah, there we go.
And I said, what's that? He said, well, it's just what I said, dummy. It's a guitar show. He said, people are there selling vintage guitars. I said, so why would I want to go? I have a guitar. He said, I have that electric, and I've got this little Yamaha acoustic that I write on. What more do I need? He said, you don't get it. I'll be there in 20 minutes. We're going to go. And so anyway, well, yeah, come on by. So he picks me up, and we go there. Oh, my Lord. We walked in the door, and I smelled about, 5,000 guitar cases. That woof just covers you up, right?
Yeah.
I went, oh, my Lord. And so I started knocking around. And on that particular show, I bought one guitar and one amp, both Gretsches. And then I started buying every Gretsch book that I could lay my hands on. And the more I studied about them and the history of Gretsch, well, I knew I was in love with that guitar, that little black dual jet. It's really a part of my life. And the whole family's life, really. The story behind that guitar is I had lost my mother when I was 14, and my father was not doing well. He couldn't work. And so there wasn't, no extra money of any kind, right? We barely could get along. And I had just started playing guitar, and I had acquired this little, I think it was like $10 or $15, an old harmony guitar. But I did know a few chords, and I walked by this music store called Melody Music in Denver. On that wall was just guitars everywhere, but right in the middle of this one wall over there was this little black dual jet, and it just like started singing to me. So I took it off, went to a little room, plug it into the amp and play it, and I did that off and on for, I don't know, 5 or 6 visits, knowing I could never buy it. And finally, the lady at the store said, "Young man, are you ever going to buy that guitar?" And I said, "No." And she says, "Well, why? You seem to love it." I said, "Well, I do love it." I said, I really can't, no way that I could buy it, And she said, "Well, it's not like you just have to pay me. You could have, your mom come in or your dad come in and sign, and you can take it home, but you make payments on it, And I just blurted out, "Well, I don't have a mother." And she said, "What?" I said, "No, my mom died a couple years ago." I mean, it really, kind of rocked or rolled a bit, I guess. And I said, I won't come in here. I won't bother you anymore. And she said, "Oh, no, you come back in." I said, "No, I'm not." So anyway, I didn't go in for about maybe 2 weeks. I walk right by it, just keep on going. So anyway, one time I had to know if it was still there. So I go in there and I look, and there that guitar is. And she says, "Well, I was hoping you would come back, young man." And yes, pick it up, go in there and play. So I played for about a half hour, come back out. And she said, "You really love that guitar, don't you?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "Could you afford to pay me $17 and like 19 cents a month? Could you figure out how to do that?" And I went, "Well, I think so." And she says, "Well, I've gone to the bank and I brought some paperwork back, and I want to sign this as if I'm your mother, and I will be responsible for paying off this guitar if for some reason you can't make those payments. But if you tell me that you can make these payments, then I will co-sign with you." This is the owner of the store.
This is awesome. Yeah.
Buying the guitar twice.
Yeah.
If I don't show, I'm a minor, I'm like 16 years old. I couldn't get over it. And so I walked out of that store, not with only that guitar, but the amp. Over $500. I mean, I didn't have a driver's license. She couldn't really double check anything. I just said, "My name is Brent Maher, and I gave her my address where my dad and I were staying, and I walked, and I still haven't. And it's never crossed my mind to ever update or get some guitar that other bands' kids were playing, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Never crossed my mind.
Well, yeah, there's something really special there.
That woman was an angel unawares. It really changed my life.
What a great story. I really enjoyed speaking with you. So where can people find Night of the Orphan Train?
Night of the Orphan Train, I can see it's an audiobook. You can get it at Amazon. You just Night of the Orphan Train, and that baby will pop right up to be purchased. If you belong to Audible, you can go to Audible. It's right there. Barnes & Noble, any place that you would get your audiobooks, it's right there to be had.
Excellent.
Like I said, it's called Night of the Orphan Train.
Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@bobbyowsinski.com. You can also learn all about the latest in music, audio, and production news, and find out about openings for my latest online classes at bobbyowsinski.com. This is Bobby Owsinski. I will see you next time.